Everybody that went on the missions trip, come on up. None of us are in charge tonight.
By the way, guys, try to talk into the microphone so that the live stream can hear you.
So last month, we went on a missions trip to Hindman, Kentucky. They had encountered really bad flooding about a year prior to that. It was July of 2022. So, and we've got some stories to tell, but that's kind of the reason that we went. You know, I really felt called to go somewhere that was kind of off the beaten path, that maybe didn't get the national recognition for having a disaster, and there's just so much need there that really gets looked over. So we'll get started with some of the pictures.
So this is the group that went. Scott was able to join us for one day. We were like, why are you even trying to come? You're about to go to Brazil for 10. But he couldn't let us go without coming. He was actually there on Monday and part of the day Tuesday. And on the first day, Aaron always says with disaster relief, you have to be fluid because flexible isn't good enough. Like, you have to be more than flexible. The first day we didn't actually get to work. So he drove all the way to Kentucky Monday afternoon, and then didn't get to work the first day, worked a few hours on Tuesday and had to come back. But anyway, and then those of us that you see here were there, and then Madison Parsley and Brother Jonas Taylor were also with us, and they weren't able to come tonight. But
I'll talk. So they do have us set up to where we can kind of walk through day by day what we did. And so we left around 7 o'clock that morning, 7:15, and we arrived at their youth center. They had bought a old Methodist church where they had set up a place that we could come and stay. Do we want to go ahead and talk about this place? Mm-hmm. Okay, so it was a giant room, and you could tell it was a youth room just by all the stuff that was in it, and I had a blast looking at stuff. But
Lots of random stuff.
yes, just tons of, there was everything in there. But it wasn't just for us. When we got there, one of the first things we realized was that this church uses their youth center as a hostel for bikers, not, your Harley bikers that, lots of tattoos and the leather, if you stereotype them. These were bicycles, and they would ride all the way across the country because the guy that was there when we got there, now, y'all talk about them. Y'all know them better, except for the last one. Do you remember their names?
Mark. There's two
No,
Marks
the
and
two
a
Marks
James.
came later. James was the one that was already there.
Yeah, James
We
was
can
there.
talk about
So I do remember James
Yep.
left from Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
James left from Dallas, Texas, I think he said May the 25th, does that sound correct?
I didn't realize that was her.
And so we were in Kentucky, around July the 25th. So in 2 months' time, June the 25th. So in a month's time, he rode a bicycle from Dallas, Texas to eastern Kentucky, which I found was just insane. He would ride, I asked him how many miles a day, and he said, of course, it depended on the terrain. But that was interesting, and then there were some other people showed up the next day that had come from Chicago. So, if any of you guys are into bicycling, you might want to catch that path. It's it's a national bicentennial bike trail or something. So, anyhow, that's my 2 cents on that.
So Aaron and I were planning ahead a little bit, and we're like, all right, we're staying at this youth center that used to be a Methodist church, so there should be Sunday school rooms, right? So the girls can sleep in one Sunday school room, and the guys can sleep in another. And then we get there, and there's the bicyclist, and there are no rooms. It's one big room. It's like this, and there's a stage. And there's one bathroom with a shower and one bathroom without a shower. And then there's a loft that's bigger than ours, where all their sound equipment was, where you were not technically supposed to sleep. But other than that, it was one big room. The Sunday school rooms, we found out, had been in the basement. And when the flood came through the year before, it flooded the basement there. So they had ripped everything out down to the concrete block walls and concrete floor and made it a supply pantry for victims of the flood. So downstairs was a bunch of shelving, and there was nowhere to sleep down there. So we were all in one big room with 3 men that rode in on their bicycles. So Madison and Hannah and I slept up on the stage, and then there was Daniel and Aaron and Scott kind of in front of the stage, not making it obvious, but like being there just to be safe. Not that we thought anything was going to happen, but it was just not what we were expecting when we came in. And because it was a hostel along the bike route, the front door stayed unlocked at all times. So that was just an added bonus for us when we got there that we found out about. But we slept on cots, and Mark had like a luxury air mattress. Not that we were envious at all, but Brother Jonas also had an air mattress that he figured out had a...
Wasn't luxury.
His was not luxury. He figured out it had a leak in it. By the end of the first night, his shoulder was completely on the floor. So Mark graciously, when they came back on Wednesday, he left his luxury air mattress with Brother Jonas so he could sleep better those last few nights. And I know Brother Jonas was very appreciative of that. But it was a lot of fun sharing the 2 bathrooms with all of us and the 3 men. But they did open up a door at the main church up the hill. And we'll talk more about this later, but their terrain, you just think it's hilly around here because the lake, this is nothing. It was like creek, road, hill, everywhere. So the church was up a hill. You felt like you had done a complete workout just walking up there. So we would actually drive Ed's car up there, and the girls at the end of the week got to go up there and take showers. But it was interesting for us there.
You want to talk about Miss Mabel now?
Is that also? Do you remember?
Not as well.
Okay. So Miss Mabel was downstairs in the supply pantry when we got there, and she did not actually go to church there. She was a social worker in the county, and the church had coordinated with her as a social worker to help hand out supplies to people that needed them. So she was downstairs working. We were eager to do something when we got there. We're like, is there anything we can help you do down here? She's like, no, but we did get to listen. That's one of the main things with disaster relief is it's not really going there with the mindset of I'm going to get as much work done as possible. It's what do the people need when you get there, and a lot of it is just a listening ear. So we just all stood around and listened to Miss Mabel tell stories from the flood. She was actually in Tennessee. Her and her husband were at Pigeon Forge on a little vacation when the flood hit, and her family was still at home. So her daughter owned 3 horses, and they're used to flooding because, like I said, it's like hill, creek, road, like it floods, but this was not like anything they were used to. So they were getting alerts that it was flooding, and they're like, oh yeah, flooding, what else is new? But then they started calling each other and waking each other up like this is worse than normal. So her daughter goes to try to save her horses that are in the field, and they take Miss Mabel's pretty brand new Subaru to drive to the barn. And where they parked it, they quickly figured out that's not going to be safe. Let's pull it into the barn because the water never gets up to the barn. So they take it to a stall, and they go try to rescue the horses. They get 1 horse, and they realize we're not going to be able to get the other 2. We're just going to pray they make it to high ground and they're okay, and we're going to take this 1 horse and go back home. Well, they got to the car, and it was gone. The water had gotten up higher than they had ever seen it gotten up to. And so they go back to the house, walking with their horse that was freaking out because it was still pouring down rain. And so they're sitting on their front porch trying to recover from that effort, and their neighbors come up. It was, and I may be a little, the details may be a little iffy here. There was an older couple that lived close to them, and one of their grandsons is blind, and then there was a granddaughter
think it was a son that's blind and a grandson that was there.
So it was the son that was blind and his sister and one of the grandkids, and then one grandkid was still with the grandparents. That's what it was. Thank you. So they were like, our grandparents are stuck. We need you to come help. So the daughter that owns the horses knows a little bit about knots and ropes. So she goes down there and she has a life jacket from somewhere. I'm not sure where the life jacket came from. But she takes a rope and ties it around the life jacket, and she's trying to throw it across the running water to the older couple and their 11-year-old grandson that were still at the house. And it takes a few tries, and the grandma finally gets a hoe that was beside the door and grabs the life jacket and pulls it across, and they tie it to a porch post. And at the other end of the rope, Miss Mabel's granddaughter has tied herself to it, and she's got herself around a tree holding it tight. And Miss Mabel's daughter kind of goes across the rope in the running water, and they're trying to decide who to get first, and she goes ahead and takes the 11-year-old grandson across the running water. Well, as soon as they get across that running water, the whole house just gives way. And so the grandparents did not make it. They got washed away. But the porch post that the rope was tied to was still standing. So if that porch post had also given way with the house, Mabel's granddaughter, was on the other end of that rope, and she would not have been able to keep herself up. So they were thankful the porch post didn't give way. But there were so many stories like that. There were 34 deaths in that county from that one flood.
20 in that county and 35 total. 35 total.
Sorry. We're a little iffy on our numbers. 20 in the county, 35 total, somewhere around there. It was devastating, to say the least. So there were stories like that, and we'll tell a few more as we go. Go ahead. So,
A little background on the flood. It had rained on and off for 2 weeks, and it saturated the ground. And at 1 a.m., it dumped 12 inches of rain in 1 hour. And they lost power. It was pitch black. We heard stories of people waking up to water in their bedrooms, trying to stumble out in the middle of the night. All they had was the light on their phone, trying to gather their family and get up into the woods away from the water that was continually rising. So it was, if you could really imagine like being woken up by that, hearing the rush of the water, because we were told so Hindman's a small town, it's only got one red light, but on the main street that the church is at, the pastor told us that he was told that if rushing water is moving at 6 miles an hour, it can turn over a vehicle. And they figured that the water coming down the main street was at 40 miles an hour. So it was like a raging river down all of these hills and hollers, because that's all this place is there's more flat ground beside of the church here than there is in the entire county. All it is just creeks and hollers. And when this came in, there was no place for people to shelter. It affected everyone and everything in the entire county. So it was really devastating countywide. And there's a few pictures here. Like I said, when we went, it was a year after it had happened. So a lot of cleanup had taken place, but a lot of the stuff that they didn't have to get done was still kind of like it was.
So the picture that you see of the bridge there, you can see it's not connected to the road at all on that one end. A lot of the bridges, they were not able to rebuild all of them, because if you picture having road, creek, and then there's houses, there were bridges on almost every driveway. And some of them had been rebuilt and were brand new, and some of them, they had to build new roads And really, people were having to share driveways that hadn't been before because it was impossible to build all of those bridges back at once. But the bridge that you see there was one of the road bridges that still had not been built back. And then,
Across the street from where
yeah,
we
that was right across the street from where we stayed. So when we didn't get to go work the first day, we kind of walked around and looked at some of the damage. And this was a year later, and there were still cars and parking lots that had water in the headlights because they just had not gotten everything that was ruined hauled off yet. And the other picture you see, those are cars in the middle of a field, and I know it's kind of hard to see up on the screen, but there were still cars just abandoned in parking lots, fields, on the side of the road, in the creeks. They had done a lot, but I don't know if y'all can imagine, the water rushed through their houses and took entire houses off their foundation. So you think about how much stuff we have in our house and how much that would have been to clean up when it was that widespread. So they had a really big task ahead of them there.
Something that was a little unique, at least from my perspective with this trip, was the state had money there to purchase supplies and materials for homeowners. An abundance, it seemed like, of money to buy those things. But there just wasn't people there to get the work done. So they would order supplies and it would sit in people's yards, and if they weren't able to do it, or if a neighbor or a family member wasn't able to, then they just waited until teams like us came in and filled that void. So it was kind of a unique situation where, you know, like I said, the money was there to get the materials they needed to build back and to, put things back in order, but it was just waiting on volunteers and people to come in and do them. On day 2, one of the first things that we did, worked on Miss Joy's house. It's a little old lady that didn't get affected by the flood as much as a lot of the other houses, but this is far eastern Kentucky, and it's up in the mountains, and it gets cold in the winter. Well, she's lived in this house for years, didn't have underpinning on her house, didn't have insulation under her house, didn't have insulation in the attic. And she said she obviously froze during the winter. I'd went into her house a couple of times and talked to her that first day, and she had several heaters scattered around her house for the winter. But just trying to survive in a situation like that, where you just don't have insulation in your house, and that's how it had been for I don't know how long. I didn't see any insulation that the house had ever had. So one of the things that she was able to get through this long-term recovery was insulation, and her roof had been leaking, so she was able to get supplies for that. And you can see the black tarp sitting in the yard in front of the house. It was all sitting under that, waiting for a team to come and to help her. And that was one of the privileges that we got of being able to work with her, or work for her, for the next few days. And I'll talk a little bit more about finishing up there and the experiences with her in a little bit.
You want to talk about tarring the roof?
Mark.
If you wondered who the Tennessee goat was, it's Ed. I was up there, I've kind of gotten soft working on the school roofs. They're all flat. And this one was about a 612 pitch, and little steep for me being comfortable without a rope. So I was getting the rope ready, and Ed jumps up there and walks around like he owned the place. If you need somebody to get on your roof, call Ed.
Patty may disagree with that. Do you want to talk about tarring some?
This was my first time to go on a disaster relief. I had no real idea what it might be, what it might entail. And I don't have a real extensive skill set, so I wasn't sure what value I would have to the team going. But it worked out that by happenstance, this roof needed repair, and so the next house that we worked on also needed roof repair. So in my ancient past, I used to do a little roofing, okay? So I wasn't, this wasn't new to me, and I wasn't as scared of heights, so that wasn't a problem. So I thought, well, that's for me. That's where I'll go. So yeah, that's I'll take that. Tennessee goat. Yeah, that's good.
So my name's Hannah. I don't go to church here. I go to Upper Hilton. So if you're wondering who I am, that's who I am.
Sorry, we didn't do introductions.
Well, I did. When we talked to Upper Hilton, I got them to introduce because most of them didn't know, but I'm the only one odd man out, so it's fine. My favorite part about Mr. Ed being on the roof is I was just looking up there, and at one point, Mr. Ed was on like the edge of the roof, and y'all's preacher's not that big, and he's got his finger around Mr. Ed's belt loop, and I was thinking, okay, if this goes wrong, it's like they're both done for, so, I mean, but nothing happened, so, yes, yeah.
I know who needs to talk.
Go ahead.
You can come up. You were with me. We'll do this together.
They had the hardest job.
It was an enjoyable job, though, I must say.
That is Ethan and I in our selfie.
It was,
And the
yes.
other picture is Ethan and Daniel actually under the floor. I was further back when the picture was taken, so you can't see me.
Yeah, we had the fun task of installing the insulation